In August of 1882, the Town Council of Dodge City, Kansas passed Ordinance Number 67. It did not mince words. No person could carry, concealed or otherwise, any pistol, any bowie knife, any slung shot, or any other dangerous or deadly weapon inside the town. And when a Texas herd came up the trail and hit the edge of a Kansas cattle town, the first thing a cowboy met was not a saloon. It was a sign, and a marshal, and a rack behind the marshal's desk where your iron was supposed to go. Most of it did. Some of it never did. Number 3 on this list was small enough to vanish inside a closed fist, and by the time a man reached for it, the argument was already finished. And number 1 was the very weapon the whole ordinance was written about, the gun a Texan was ordered to surrender at the town line, and the one no Texan ever truly handed over. These are 25 weapons the law up north tried to ban, and the men on the Chisholm Trail carried anyway. Hit subscribe, because this list gets heavier the closer we get to number 1. Let's count them down. Number 25, the slung shot. Picture a heavy weight, a musket ball, a lump of lead, sewn into a leather pouch on the end of a short braided cord. Silent, cheap, and small enough to coil inside a coat pocket. A drover who could not afford a fine revolver could make one of these in an evening. And here is the thing. When Texas passed its infamous weapons law in 1871, the single most repressive carry statute any American state had yet written, the legislature named the slung shot by name, right beside the pistol and the bowie knife. The state outlawed it in writing. The man riding out of Texas slipped it into his pocket and kept going. Number 24, the blackjack. A leather sap weighted at one end, made to drop a man without waking the whole camp. On a trail drive, discipline mattered more than glory, and a night guard did not always want the noise and muzzle flash of a gunshot spooking 3,000 head of longhorns into a stampede. A quiet weapon had its place. Lawmakers up and down the country listed the blackjack, the billy, and the sandbag among the arms a peaceable town would not tolerate. The trail hand carried one anyway because cattle do not read statutes. Number 23, brass knuckles. Cast iron or brass slipped over the fingers, turning a fist into something that broke bone. When those saloon fights in Abilene and Wichita turned ugly, and they turned ugly often, a set of knuckles let a man finish a brawl without ever drawing a blade or a gun that might get him arrested or killed. That Texas statute of 1871 spelled it out, brass knuckles among the forbidden, which tells you something plain. The state of Texas had already decided these men were too well armed before they ever crossed the Red River. Number 22, the cane. Not just any cane. A sword cane hid a slim blade inside a gentleman's walking stick. A loaded cane was hollowed and filled with lead, an ordinary-looking stick that hit like an iron bar. A trail boss coming into town to close a cattle deal wanted to look respectable, and nothing looked more respectable than a cane. It also happened to be a weapon the North Carolina and Texas statutes listed among the deadly and the deceptive. Respectable on the outside, outlawed on the inside. That was rather the point. Number 21, the boot dirk. A short, straight, double-edged fighting knife that rode down inside the boot, out of sight until it was needed. Across the South and the frontier, lawmakers treated the dirk and the dagger exactly the way they treated a concealed pistol, banning it from the pocket and the boot. And still, ask any trail hand crossing a swollen river or bedding down in Comanche country, and the dirk was not a luxury. It was the last thing between him and a bad night. Outlawed as a hidden blade, worn hidden anyway. Number 20, the push dagger. A short blade set into a T-shaped grip that sat across the palm, so the whole fist became the handle. Gamblers loved it, and the cattle towns were full of gamblers, because a push dagger could ride in a vest pocket and appear in a heartbeat when the cards went wrong. It was built for one purpose: to be concealed and then to be sudden, which is exactly the quality every concealed weapon law of the era was written to stamp out. The men who wore them did not much care. Number 19. The pepperbox pistol. Before the modern revolver settled the argument, the pepperbox gave a man several barrels bundled together, each one loaded, turning to fire in sequence. It was not accurate passed across a card table, and it did not need to be. It was a pocket gun, a coat gun, a hideout for a man who wanted more than one shot without carrying a full belt rig. By the trail years, it was already old-fashioned, but old-fashioned and loaded still beats fashionable and empty. It rode north in a lot of coat pockets the marshals never saw. Number by number, this is easy to miss, so step back and look at the whole man. A Texas cowboy hitting a Kansas railhead in 1871 might be wearing a belt gun on his hip, a second smaller pistol tucked away, a knife in his boot, and something quiet in a coat pocket, all at once. Now understand what waited for him. Abilene had hired its first real marshal, Tom Smith, in June of 1870, and Smith's very first official act was to order that no man carry a firearm inside the town without a permit. This was the deal at every cattle town gate. You checked your guns at the marshal's office like a coat at a restaurant, and you got a claim on them when you left. The law was written. The rack was real. The question was only ever how much of it a man actually surrendered. Back to the count. Number 18. The Smith & Wesson No. 1. This little revolver mattered far more than its size. Smith & Wesson held the Roland White patent, the patent on a cylinder bored straight through to take a self-contained metallic cartridge, and for years that patent gave them a near monopoly on the cartridge revolver in America. The No. 1 was small, a .22 rimfire, a true pocket gun. And a pocket gun was precisely the animal those town ordinances were built to hunt, the weapon a man could hide when he was told to disarm. Small, modern, and easy to make disappear. Number 17. The Colt New Line Pocket Revolver. When Colt saw the demand for something a man could carry unseen, it built small, short-barreled revolvers meant for a vest or a coat. On a cattle drive, your big belt gun was for the open trail and the wolves and the river crossings. The New Line was for town, for the moment you were told to hand over your weapons and wanted to keep just one. Colt built for the pocket. The cattle towns wrote their laws against the pocket. Both sides understood each other perfectly. Number 16. The Lamat. This one is a monster of an idea. Designed by a New Orleans doctor, Jean-Alexandre Lamat, it carried 9 shots in its cylinder, .42 caliber, revolving around a second barrel down the center, a short, smooth bore that fired a load of buckshot like a shotgun. 9 pistol rounds, then one devastating blast at close range. It was a favorite of Confederate officers, and when the war ended and those men drifted west to hire onto cattle outfits, some of that hardware drifted with them. No cattle town ordinance ever imagined a pistol that was also a shotgun. The men who owned one saw no reason to explain it. Number 15. The Colt Model, 1849 Pocket. It was one of the best-selling firearms Samuel Colt ever made, a small percussion revolver that turned up in more pockets and saddlebags than almost any gun of its era. By the trail years, the cartridge guns were pushing it aside, but obsolete does not mean gone. It was cheap, it was small, and it was already in 100,000 hands. On paper, it belonged to the past. In practice, it still rode into town, hidden, past every sign that said no guns allowed. Number 14. The Coach Gun. Take a double-barreled shotgun, saw the barrels down short, And you have a weapon that at close range asks no questions and takes no arguments. Stagecoach guards, the men riding shotgun, made it famous, and on a cattle drive a short scattergun rode in the wagon for wolves, for rustlers, for trouble in the dark. It was legal enough out on the plains, but the moment it came off the wagon and into a cattle town street, it became exactly the kind of deadly weapon those ordinances were written to keep off the sidewalk. Number 13. The Remington New Model Army of 1858. A .44 caliber percussion revolver with a solid frame, tougher and often quicker to reload than its Colt rivals because a man could swap the whole cylinder in the field. Plenty of these came up the trail in Confederate and Union veterans' holsters, and plenty got converted to fire metallic cartridges as the years went on. It was a serious fighting sidearm. And a serious fighting sidearm was precisely what a Texan was not going to leave on a marshal's rack if he could help it. Number 12. The Colt 1851 Navy, a .36 caliber 6-shooter, percussion, and one of the most beautifully balanced revolvers Colt ever built, with around 270,000 made before production ended in 1873. This was Wild Bill Hickok's gun. He wore a pair, butts forward, and in 1865, in a Springfield, Missouri town square, he drew one and killed a man named Davis Tutt at a range most men could not hit a barn from. Here is the irony worth sitting with. The most famous cattle town lawman in history, the man who would enforce the no-gun ordinance in Abilene, did it wearing the very kind of gun the trail hands refused to give up. Number 11. The Colt Model 1860 Army, the .44 caliber percussion revolver that armed the Union in the Civil War. And when that war ended, thousands of them went home on the hips of men who had nowhere left to go but west. They hired onto trail outfits, and the gun came with them. It was the surplus of one war becoming the everyday iron of the cattle frontier. And every time one of those veterans rode into a Kansas town, that battle-proven Colt was contraband the second he crossed the line. Here is the fact that turns this whole list on its head. We keep talking about the Kansas towns and their ordinances, but the men driving these herds were Texans, and Texas had already outlawed most of what they carried. In 1871, the Texas legislature passed what historians have called the most repressive anti-carry law any American state had enacted up to that time. It forbade carrying, openly or concealed, any pistol, dirk, dagger, slung shot, sword cane, spear, brass knuckles, or bowie knife. There was an exception for travelers, and that is what these men were, travelers, moving through their own state's prohibition, riding 800 miles and more toward towns that would ban them all over again at the other end. They left home as outlaws by statute. They arrived as outlaws by ordinance. In between was the trail, back to the count, and it gets serious now. Number 10. The Smith & Wesson Model 1.5. It sat in the middle, bigger than that little .22 pocket gun, smaller than a full-belt revolver, a cartridge-firing revolver a man could actually hide, but that still hit with some authority. That made it perfect for exactly the situation every cowboy faced at a town line. Hand over the big obvious Colt on your hip. Keep the Model 1.5 where the marshal would not think to look. Concealable by design, and concealment was the whole game. Number 9. The Spencer Carbine. Patented in 1860 by Christopher Spencer, this was the first military metallic cartridge repeating long gun in the world, and it changed what one man could do in a fight. 7 rounds fed from a tube through the buttstock, levered out fast, at a time when most men still fired once and reloaded by hand. Around 200,000 were made, and after the Civil War they were reissued and sold off, riding west into the 1870s. To a peace officer watching a liquored-up trail crew come off the herd, A 7-shot repeater walking into his town was a nightmare with a lever on it. Number 8. The Henry Rifle. Made by the New Haven Arms Company, the 16-shot 44 caliber lever gun was so far ahead of the single-shot muskets it faced that a Confederate soldier reportedly called it that damned Yankee rifle you loaded on Sunday and fired all week. 16 rounds before reloading. For a cowboy, that was a wall of firepower he could carry on a saddle. And that is precisely why no cattle town wanted one leaned casually against its bar. The Henry did not break any single ordinance by existing. It just made every lawman in the room do the arithmetic. Number 7. The Winchester Model. 1866. The Yellow Boy. Named for its bright brass frame, it took the Henry's design and fixed its flaws, adding a side-loading gate and a wooden forearm so a man did not burn his hand, still firing that 44 rim-fire round. Around 170,000 were made, and they went everywhere the frontier went. As a saddle gun out on the open trail, no marshal could touch it. The trouble only started the moment its owner swung down off his horse and walked into town still carrying it. Number 6. The Sharps Rifle, the Big 50. A single-shot, falling block rifle chambered for enormous 50 caliber black powder cartridges, weighing as much as 16 pounds, and it was the buffalo hunter's tool of choice. How far could it reach? At the Battle of Adobe Walls in 1874, a hunter named Billy Dixon knocked a warrior off his horse at a distance an Army surveyor later measured at 1,538 yards, nearly 7/8 of a mile. A rifle like that was legal enough out on the plains. Carried down the main street of a cattle town, it was not a tool anymore. It was a statement. Number 5. The Smith & Wesson Model 3 and the Schofield built from it. This is where cartridge revolvers grew up. In 1870, the United States Army adopted the Model 3, the first standard-issue cartridge-firing revolver in American service. A break-top design that hinged open and kicked out all its empty shells at once. Then, in 1875, a cavalry officer, Major George Schofield, whose brother happened to run the Army's Ordnance Board, improved it into the Schofield, chambered in a stout .45, and built so a rider could open it and reload with one hand while the other held the reins. Fast, powerful, made for the saddle. Wells Fargo would later cut the barrels down to 5 inches so their agents could hide them. It rode in the sashes of men like John Wesley Hardin. And a gun like this, quick to reload from horseback, was the last thing a Texan checked at any rack he could avoid. The statute wanted it surrendered. The saddle wanted it close. Before the Final Four, walk into the marshal's office at the end of a long night and look at that rack of surrendered guns. Here is what the legend gets wrong. For all the ordinances and all the iron, the killing was rarer than the movies swear. One historian counted roughly 45 murders across the 5 biggest Kansas cattle towns over 15 full years, from 1870 to 1885. The very worst single year in Dodge City saw 5 men die. 5. The gun control worked more than the myth admits, and that is the strange truth under this whole list. The law named the weapons, the marshals took what they could, and the towns were quieter for it. And yet the top 4 rode in anyway, because these were the guns a Texan simply would not leave behind. Number 4. Number 4, the Bowie knife. No weapon on this list was singled out by name more often by the lawmakers of the era. That Texas statute of 1871 named it. Dodge City's Ordinance Number 67 named it. Across the South, legislatures wrote the Bowie knife into their laws, taxed it, and banned its sale, treating a heavy fighting knife with the same fear they gave a revolver. And why? Because in the hands of a Texan, it was not a tool for cutting rope. It was a broad, brutal, close-quarters weapon a man could keep when every gun had been taken from him. You could disarm a cowboy of every pistol he owned at the town line, take the belt gun and the hideout both, and he could still be carrying more knife than most men wanted to meet. The law named it more than any other blade. The trail hand wore it more than any other blade. That is not a coincidence. That is the whole story of this list, sharpened to an edge. Number 3. The Remington Model 95 Double Derringer. This is the loop we opened with, the weapon that vanished inside a closed fist. Designed by William Elliott on a patent from 1865 and made from 1866 onward, it was tiny, barely 11 ounces, 2 barrels stacked over and under, chambered in a fat 41 rimfire that shoved a heavy lead ball at close range. It cost about $8 new. It was the gambler's gun, the last card. The weapon you never saw until it was already pointed at you across a table in Abilene or Ellsworth or Dodge. And it is the purest example of everything this list is about. Every concealed carry law of the era existed to stop precisely this: a deadly weapon a man could hide in his palm and produce in a heartbeat. The statutes could not have described it better if they had drawn a picture. And so, of course, the trail towns filled with them, because a gun that fits in a fist is a gun a marshal never finds. They banned the idea of it. Men carried the fact of it. Number 2. The Winchester Model 1873, the gun that won the West. This is the rifle that put it all together. A steel frame where the yellow boy had brass, and a brand new centerfire cartridge, the 4440, throwing a 200-grain bullet with real authority. Around 720,000 were made, and it flooded the frontier. But here is the detail that made it matter on a cattle drive. Colt began chambering its revolvers for that same 4440 round, which meant a cowboy could carry a rifle on his saddle and a pistol on his hip that both ate the very same cartridge. One box of ammunition fed both guns. For a man 800 miles from a supply store, that was not a convenience. It was survival. And it meant that when a Texan rode into a Kansas town, the last thing he wanted to surrender was the rifle that shared its soul with the gun on his belt. The towns could post their signs. The 73 rode in anyway. And number 1, the weapon this entire list has been riding toward. The Colt Single Action Army, the Peacemaker. Adopted by the United States Army in 1873, chambered in a thunderous .45, and sold to civilians by mail order for about $17, it became the gun the whole Cattletown War was fought over. When a marshal in Abilene or Dodge City posted his no-gun ordinance, when he stood at the town line and told a Texas outfit to check their iron, this was the iron he meant. This was the gun on the hip that the law wanted on the rack. And this was the gun that, more than any other, never quite made it there. The men coming up the Chisholm Trail had driven 3,000 head of longhorn 800 miles through rivers and storms and hostile country with this revolver as their constant companion, and no sign nailed to a post was going to separate them from it easily. Every statute we have counted down, every ordinance, every named and forbidden weapon was in the end aimed at this one gun, on this one kind of man, at the end of this one trail. The law called it surrender. The Texan called it his. So go back to that rack behind the marshal's desk, hung with the guns of men who did as they were told. It is a real thing. It happened. The signs went up. The ordinances passed. The weapons got named one by one in the statute books of Texas and the ordinance books of Kansas. Slung shot and bowie knife and pistol and derringer, all of it written down and forbidden. And still they came up the trail wearing every bit of it, because a piece of paper nailed to a post did not mean much to a man who had just brought 3,000 cattle through hell, and the trail did not recognize a town's law until the town made him feel it. The rack filled up with the guns they surrendered. This list has been about the ones they never did. So tell me, which one would you have kept hidden riding into Abilene in 1871? Leave it in the comments and subscribe, because the next ride is already being saddled.